Kailash, really great to have you on today for our Configure It Done podcast. So we've got Kailash Attawar here from ICSOM. I was introduced to Kailash by Kyle Maligan, who we also had as a guest on this podcast a few months back. So today we're going to be speaking around S4HANA journeys and Kailash's experience with a number of S4HANA transformations. So thanks for joining us today, Kailash.
Thanks, Chris.
Welcome to the new and improved Configure It Done podcast. The Configure It Done podcast is now a place where we interview senior thought leaders in the SAP space across Australia and New Zealand, and the aim is to tap into their knowledge so we can pass on their insights to the listening SAP community.
This podcast is in partnership with the Black Dog Institute, who aim to create a mentally healthier world for everyone. If you wish to donate to the cause, please click the link below.
Kailash, I just wanted to ask, before we go into some of the questions and the topics, if you can give the audience an overview of your background, and so the audience can know, the type of projects you've led and the size of teams. That would be good as an introduction. But yeah, can you give us a bit of an overview of your background?
Yeah, so I started in my SAP journey in the early 90s. Prior to that, I actually spent about 5 or 6 years working in the UK. I moved to Germany, where I first encountered, the SAP sort of environment. At that time, it was probably a similar transition that's going on at the moment between ECC and S4. At that time, it was moving from mainframe to client-server architecture. So it was the early 90s, and I got the opportunity to work in that space. I started off, my background is quite technical, so I started off more, on the ABAP side and doing work in that space, and then I moved into I would say functional consulting, so mainly around finance, controlling, those sort of areas.
Yeah.
But pretty quickly moved into running SAP projects. That started probably in the late 90s when I started running SAP projects. In 2001, that's when I moved from Europe, or from Germany to Australia, and basically worked here in a consulting perspective across various organizations. From an industry perspective, probably focusing mainly on public sector, consumer products, and sort of mining were probably the key areas that I worked on. So I worked in that space for a while. Then I got an opportunity to head up a BPO organization servicing a utility company in Australia. Now, the BPO organization, or the majority of that work, was done out of India. So I was managing, what was being done here versus, delivering what the services were required out of the organization in India. And that was probably, close to 1,000 people servicing the organization. I also then spent some time heading up an Asia Pac practice for ERP across, multiple countries. Really, at that time, obviously S4HANA wasn't there, but it was more about delivering the ECC functionality to various organizations. And typically they were global organizations, so companies like General Motors, etc., and doing that, all the way from Korea to, Malaysia to Singapore to Australia. I then got an opportunity to work in Russia, deploying SAP in that part of the world. It wasn't just Russia. I was based in Russia, but it was actually across the former CIS. And again, that was actually delivering SAP to countries that were not used to using, I would say, a structured sort of software, put it that way. And it was challenging, but at the same time, probably the best experience from my perspective in terms of delivering change to the way people work.
Sure.
I came back in 2011 to Australia and worked on various projects here. Again, probably consumer products, utilities, mining, etc. And then COVID hit, and I got an opportunity to work in Europe. So I took that, and I spent some time in Europe delivering projects mainly around the transportation management piece of work within SAP. So if I look back on it, within Australia, before I left to go to Europe, I delivered probably the first private cloud SAP S/4HANA implementation end-to-end in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And then since then, I've probably worked on 3 or 4 other S/4HANA projects, actually 3. And we're now, obviously, I'm working on another one.
Excellent. So thank you for giving us that overview. You would have worked on, like I said, multiple projects, dealing with a lot of different people from a lot of different industries in a lot of different countries as well. And I think when we met before, I think that people element was one of the main focuses that we're going to speak about today as well. And we've got some questions around that. One question I had, you mentioned around your ABAP experience, Kailash. How do you think that's helped you when managing teams at a program level, having that knowledge and experience?
Yeah, it's a good question actually, because I think when I deal with teams and working with obviously every team has multiple resources with different skill sets, and what I often see is the people from the business side or from more from a functional perspective, from the process side, don't always understand what is required from a technology perspective. So that link between technology and business is very key to being successful, but it's also about being able to communicate what's required. So I know sitting as an ABAP developer, I was always under pressure to deliver a piece of code for a particular project. But sometimes, we didn't always understand, okay, why are we doing this? What's the bigger picture? So looking at it from an ABAP side of things. The other side of it is from a leadership point of view, everyone's saying, oh, we need X, Y, Z to be delivered, but not always understanding what the technology is required to deliver that. So being able to bridge that gap is quite important. And because I can speak to both sides, I think it's.
So Kailash, obviously when we first met, we did discuss a number of topics that you wanted to speak on. You touched on, I guess, the ABAP and I guess the technical resources and getting those right first and foremost. But one thing you were really passionate about was, I guess, the people and teams to deliver these programs. I guess first and foremost, let's talk about identifying key resources for these programs and for S/4HANA in particular. What would be your strategy around identifying those key resources?
Yeah. So I think, it's a good question. I think, typically in my mind, it's always about establishing what the requirements are up front. So, setting up an S/4HANA project is actually key to being successful long term. So establishing the framework up front, establishing what the requirements are, who we need on the team, etc., is quite key. Typically, the way I approach it is, I start by looking at people I know in the market, and going through that, and then using my network, because obviously working with people you've worked with before is good. But then the next step is obviously to reach out to recruitment agencies and obviously try and fill the gaps. But also, I think people like yourselves can highlight key resources in the market who are potentially available. And we as a program director, I may not be across them just yet. So getting visibility of that and working alongside yourselves is key, I think, in the initial stages of a project. So it's not just about saying, oh, we have these roles and please fill the roles. It's about, this is what we're trying to do over a longer period of time, and working with you to say, okay, how can you support us over the journey as well? So yes, it's key to have, it's important to have the key people at the start of the project, but also establishing the relationship with key recruiters at the start is important, because these projects are typically 2-3 year projects, and we have to make sure we have a trusted relationship with our recruiters and build that relationship, so that when we have requirements, we can go to you, but also vice versa. You may come to us and say, okay, you may not have a requirement today, but there's this person that's available, and is there something that we could use that person for? So really, it's a two-way sort of conversation. But going back to your question, Chris, it's more about setting up the high level key resources first, and then working through that.
Yeah.
Okay, I know you said about the relationship part there. That's so key with resources and with recruiters as well. Some of the most successful programs, they almost treat recruiters as an extension of their team, and bringing them up to speed, and any knowledge or any insight, and bringing them up to speed, so when a recruiter goes to market, can deliver very, very quickly, because they know the company and all that work has been done.
Yeah.
On the same kind of topic, with partnerships and relationships, I wanted to ask you a question about the SI, Kailash. Now,
Yes.
depending on the size of the business, will determine how much competition and how many SIs you get to choose from. Obviously, if you're a multi, global, huge company, multi-country company, there's not many SIs that could probably service that. In Australia, there's a lot of smaller companies that may have access to a lot of tier twos, where there's a lot of competition. But in your experience, how do you select the right SI? Which is a very broad question, I know, but if you can give any insight around selecting the right SI, that would be great.
Yeah. So obviously, when we select an SI, typically we go through an RFP process, and we invite various SIs to bid for the work. I think you can look at it purely from a cost, functional expertise, etc. But what I always look for, and what I think is very important, is the cultural fit from the SI to the organization. So yes, you may have an SI that is fantastic from a cost perspective, and they can deliver functionally what's required. But if they have an approach that doesn't really fit to the organization, and every organization is different, so I'm not saying there's a one fits all.
Yep.
But having that cultural fit is quite important, and it's hard sometimes to actually understand how when you're selecting an SI, how do you evaluate that cultural fit? Because it's sort of intuitive, it's not like it's something you can directly measure.
You took my next question away from me, Kailash. Exactly right.
Yeah. So very often it's about talking through reference clients, talking to people we know in the market, and saying, okay, how have you worked with X, Y, and Z, and understand it from that perspective. Obviously, cost and functionality is always important, but this for me is quite important in terms of actually delivering the project. I've been through, I would say, several over the years, several RFPs and evaluating, and I've sat on both sides. I've sat on the client side and I've sat on the consulting side, both ways. But every time, what I've seen is it's about relationships.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that we have a trust between the SI and the client. Yes, cost, expertise from a functional perspective is important. But then you want to probably dig a bit deeper and ask, what are the ways of working? So, for example, some of these projects are global projects that I've worked on, where you have teams sitting in different locations. Yeah. So you may look at, okay, what's the cultural fit? If you're looking at Australia as itself, but if you're working globally, you may have people in, I don't know, in India, in the Philippines, and in various parts of the world, and how do they work with each other is quite important. So understanding the communication within the SI and from the SI to the client is quite important to understand that. I maybe just going back to an example, when I worked in Russia, I had a team sitting in Russia, I had a team in South Africa, a team in India, a team in the UK. And I think initially there was quite, I wouldn't say reluctance, but it was like a lot of questions about, how do we work with each other? Because they were quite different in terms of personalities, in terms of ways of working. And choosing, at that time, we weren't choosing an SI, but it was more about how do we work together. And getting people together in face-to-face and actually understanding, what the differences are, but also what people bring as value to a project. So it doesn't matter where you're sitting, but if you're bringing value to the actual project, that's really important. So, we have to look at it as a whole when we're choosing an SI. It's not just about saying, okay, you met a cost, or you've met you can deliver it from a functional perspective. It's how do you bring the people on board, engage with the client, and maybe even if the support is part of that request, then how do we support as well?
Perfect. Yeah. So to summarize that, what I'm hearing is relationships definitely key when selecting an SI. Also the cultural fit, and you give a few examples there, but also how the SI communicates internally with their different teams. That's the kind of three insights I got from that.
Yeah. So for example, an SI may say, okay, they can deliver and they can communicate with the client, but it's within their own organization.
Within their own,
how they communicate.
And you mentioned there, Kailash, around, I guess, making sure that the SI is a cultural fit. How do you develop that culture between an SI and a business? I'm sure that's pretty difficult, but I guess how would you manage that culture fit from an SI?
Yeah. So typically, obviously, when we go through an RFP and we're dealing with the leadership and the team. Yeah. I would say the initial phases of a project. So when we go through blueprint design, that's when we actually see the real people on the ground who are going to deliver, and that's the key point to make sure we establish those connections. Obviously, if there are issues there, we go back to the leadership team. Very often it's about who and within Australia, I know a lot of the people, so I can reach out and say, okay, how if we're having concerns about a person or a group of people, I can reach out. But if it's wider than that, then obviously we'd probably want to just another sort of conversation there.
Yeah, sure.
Excellent. Okay, so obviously we mentioned before when we met before, like people kept coming through, and you said a phrase that was really insightful around people, process, and then technology, and it did resonate with me that people is number one, then process and technology. But can you give us an insight as to what you mean by that statement that you made?
Yeah. So I think the driver for most projects that I've worked on has been technology, whether it's been upgrading from ECC to S4, or a company may have some systems that are becoming obsolete. Typically, that's the driver to say, okay, we need a change. But when it comes to actually delivering based on what the change or the envisaged change is, it's about looking at the people and saying, and I'm not talking about the people on the project, I'm talking about the people after the project who are going to live with the system or systems. So that's when I talk people, process, technology, it's about understanding the impacts that we will have as we deploy a particular project to the people in the organization, both from through the people, but then the processes that are being impacted. I think it's becoming even more important now with AI coming into play. We're looking more and more at robotic process automation, which will change significantly the way people work. So we need to, as part of these projects, we need to bring people on that journey, and really, I think it's about enabling them to understand the new technology, but also then saying these are the opportunities in your workspace to do things differently. I probably spend 80% of my life at work, and that's probably the same for all of us. But when you implement a project, you're actually impacting the way people are working in their day-to-day lives, and we have to be able to say to them, there's an advantage in the change we're implementing to your day-to-day work. And if you can bring people on that journey, you will be successful. If you don't do that, then people will put up barriers and resistance, and you probably won't be successful. So all I'm saying is make sure that you bring the people and the changes in the process based on the technology on that journey.
That's really insightful. It's a really good learning for us as well. Focusing on the advantage if you are making a change, and then bringing the team on the journey. So that's really insightful.
Yeah, I think you mentioned before. So I guess what I'm getting from that is, I guess, that the people make the projects, and I think you mentioned before that certain teams will show certain behaviors. I guess in your mind, what type of behaviors would a successful team show?
Yeah, so from a behavior point of view, I think what's important whenever you set up a project, it's important to establish what the purpose of the team is, what as a team you would be looking at in terms of purpose and values, and the values of that team will drive your behaviors. So, typically when you build a team, people come from different parts of the world, different organizations, maybe different backgrounds, and it's about setting up some rules. I wouldn't say, well, maybe it's not rules, but it's about this is how we want to drive this project, and these are the values and behaviors we want to see observed. Now, in a large project, you're going to have lots and lots of people with different personalities and different ways of working. And I don't think there's one project I've worked on where there's there's been some sort of difference of opinion, put it that way.
Yeah.
So you've got to manage that. But the main thing is that if you've got a framework, you can then always refer back to that. You can always say, as a team, and this is what I would always say is start with that as when you're forming the team, get everyone on the same page in terms of values and in terms of behaviors. And over time during the project, you may want to change that, but always have some reference point. So you can always go back and say, if someone's not following what we've determined or jointly as a value or a behavior, then we can refer back to that. The other side of it is sometimes, behavior may be because there may be some personal, influences that, we need to look at. So before reacting to someone's behavior, it's important also to understand why someone is acting in a certain way. So I think it's important also just, if there are concerns around the behavior, having those discussions. There may be some coaching that has to be undertaken. But obviously, if after that you don't get to a result, then in the end the larger project has priority. So
for sure,
you may make changes. Yeah.
For sure. And I'm sure from that, I guess your experience, managing certain people and different behaviors, that you might have run into a few bad eggs on a program. I guess how would you go about managing somebody who is a bad egg on a program?
Yeah. So typically, if I have someone where I think, okay, we've established the values and behaviors on this program, they're not reflecting that, and then it could be someone internally directly reporting to me. It could be someone maybe in a third party, where we engaged a third party to deliver something where, someone in that organization is not delivering. So I would probably look at it in two ways. If it's internal, certainly the first step for me is always have the conversation and be very clear about what we're expecting and what we're seeing as not being delivered. And typically I would give a person a bit of time to hopefully make changes, but that's what we do. If it's an external party, again, it's about talking to their leadership and saying, there's an issue in this space. Please, can you address it? And again, we'd probably review it over a few weeks or so. But I think what's important here is you can't let these things drag on. You need to be very quick in terms of resolving it. And by that I mean, probably weeks, not months, where you give someone time to change. You need to work quickly, because otherwise it can actually get into, I'd say, a different way of working within the team as well.
Kailash, obviously you're very passionate about people. One question that we've asked on multiple podcasts is, how would you define a successful program? But how would you classify or define a successful program in your eyes? Because you've led many, so it's a very tough question to answer. But how would you?
The obvious answer is you delivered something on time and budget, and within scope. But that's, yes, that's part of it. That's part of the answer. But for me, it's more about people. So when I reflect on projects where I think, I've delivered it well and I've, had a good result, typically I'm still in contact with those people. They still, again, I have calls almost, I would say, on a monthly basis with people I've worked with 20 years ago, 15 years ago, etc., because they want to keep in touch and they respect the fact that we, as a group, have delivered something. So success sort of generates I would say, a collaboration even after the project, where people reach out and say, "Oh, we haven't talked for 6 months or whatever, but we were on this project together, and it's it's great, that we catch up again." I still catch up with people who probably, maybe I shouldn't go there, but got married on projects and have children today, and they call me up on their children's birthdays. That for me is in some ways a success, because it's not about what we deliver to the client, but it's about that relationship afterwards, where everyone thinks, "Oh, actually, we did a good job."
Yeah, that speaks volumes of your character, Kailash. That's brilliant. I remember doing a podcast before with a gentleman called Clive Mancy, and I asked him the same question, and he had a very similar response to you. He said a successful program is when you have a reunion in 20 years' time.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's exactly the same. And Clive, I've known him for a long time, and he's got a great character. And like I said, it speaks volumes of your character there, Kailash.
Yeah.
So that's brilliant. Kailash, thank you very much for those insights. I think that was a very good start to our S4 Do's and Don'ts series that we're putting together. Thank you for coming on. Now I know we're going to interview a close friend of yours from Ipson, Adrian, soon. Is there anybody else that you would like to hear on the podcast aside from Adrian?
There probably are, but let me think about it, and
I'll put you on the spot
there. So off the top, there certainly are.
Mm-hmm.
People I've worked with, especially in Australia, I think is probably where you're coming from. So there are a few other names I could provide, and
Excellent. All right, well, we'll catch up after, and really appreciate you coming on.
Please like, share, comment and subscribe to the Configure It Done podcast.